I've come out shooting with a bunch of watch geeks and photographers. I don't know where we are. Is your hair sorted?
Yeah, I think so.
So where are we? This is Alan, by the way.
Yeah, Inverary.
This video really didn't go to plan. We had this idea of going out as a group, take some cool shots, go for a big old hike and just talk about watches. But in typical Scottish fashion, it started to piss it down. So the video didn't turn out how I thought it would. Within the watches that people bought as a group, you had your usual suspects, but it was quite cool the amount of Polar Dial Explorer 2s that we had in the group. There was one watch that really stood out for me, was this Baltic MR01. I found this interesting because when this watch was launched, I'm a fan of Baltic. I think Baltic do some really cool watches. They've always stood out as a brand who have identified cool things about watches, nostalgic things about watches, and able to execute that in a decent package at a decent price. But the problem that I had with this watch was when it was launched, it felt like, or rather it came across as a watch that was trying to be something that it isn't. It looked like it was trying to be a haute horology piece with the Breguet numerals, the dolphin hands, and then that micro rotor movement with quite a lot of finishing going on within the movement. It felt like this was trying to be something that it isn't. But then I got hands-on with this watch and it absolutely isn't trying to be something it isn't. It's just a traditionally designed watch. Usually this design is attached to people like Patek or Breguet themselves or A. Lange & Söhne, brands that are far more expensive than the £555 price tag that this thing has. But the execution of this thing is what stands out. This is brilliantly executed, but I say that with it being in the window, within the frame of being a £500 watch. And I think the challenges around a watch like this is that because it resembles haute horology, because it so closely is tied in with watch brands that have built fantastic machines around this traditional design, we associate that style of a watch to that level of watchmaking. And this absolutely isn't that. But just because it looks like that doesn't mean it's trying to be that. I was just impressed with this watch. There are things that absolutely stand out as being superb. The finishing, the thoughtfulness, the design around this watch I think is fantastic. And that is nothing particularly groundbreaking. But that's what I kind of like around Baltic, is that the watches that they create, they aren't groundbreaking watches. They're just very well executed watches at a very accessible price. And that's quite fun. Biggest thing that stands out with them is how they identify the nostalgic little characteristics or nostalgic little features that we see in the other watches, the traditional watches, or I guess the watches of old. The MR01 has a 36mm wide stainless steel case. It's 9mm thick. The lug to lug is 44mm and we have a 20mm lug width. The glass is Hesselite, so it's going to scratch very easily, but then equally you're going to have to buff it out very easily. But the important thing around the glass is that it's domed and it really naturally adds to the vintage styling of this watch in the way that the domed glass distorts the dial. On the back we have a display case back, and that is displaying the Hanzo caliber 5000A. This is an automatic micro rotor movement with 42 hours of power reserve, and it is accurate from -20 to +20 seconds a day. It has 30 joules and beats at 28,800 beats per hour. We're going to come back to the movement because there's quite a lot to talk about with the movement, but the overall look of the watch, this is clearly a traditionally inspired watch with the Breguet numerals, the small size at 36mm, the dolphin hands, and then just the general layout of the watch. There's no date, there's no complication, we just have the sub-seconds. Now I think that's perhaps where my brain went kind of wrong in my initial assessment of the watch, is that there are characteristics of this watch which are screaming out to be haute horology, but that's not really the case. That doesn't mean that this is trying to be haute horology. It just isn't another vintage inspired dive watch. This is a vintage inspired dress watch, and that isn't the hype at the moment. That isn't what is hot. And so it's kind of nice. It's kind of different to see a watch company focusing on that. It also means that we don't really see that as a commercial offering with the smaller brands. It's more the higher end artisan brands or the brands with a lot of heritage. Those are the ones who tend to do this kind of watch. So initially I thought this was trying to be something that it clearly isn't. It isn't haute horology. 500 quid it can't be. Patek have traditionally inspired watches for £30,000. These guys have one for £550. There's obviously a lot in between those two watches. We have the Longines Master Collection at 1,900. We have the Jaeger-LeCoultre Master Ultra Thin Small Seconds at £7,400. We have an A. Lange & Söhne Saxonia at £15,200. And then we have a Vacheron Constantin Patrimony at £19,100. If you want a traditional watch, just simply decide how much you want to spend, and then there's a whole array. This just joined that lineup at the more accessible end. Now let's talk about the movement, because the movement is quite an interesting one. Usually micro rotors are saved for haute horology because you're wanting that convenience of automatic within a dress watch. One nice characteristic of a dress watch is that it's thin. Typically automatic movements aren't thin because they have that big fat rotor on the back. That's the benefit of having a micro rotor. This movement is okay. It's accurate enough for the price range that it's at. My gripe with this movement, two gripes. One, the rotor is very noisy. It kind of makes the movement wobble a bit. I mean, you don't really shake a watch like that, do you? But if it's just on your wrist, you can feel it and you can hear it. But the other side is the finishing of this movement. And that's probably the only area of the watch that does feel like it's trying to be something that it isn't. This has some very complex, very detailed finishing techniques, but they've been clearly carried out on the cheap and by a machine as opposed to by hand. Finishing a movement like this, at a price point like this, I feel is like putting truffle shavings on French fries from Five Guys. It's unnecessary. This doesn't need to be done like this. The front, I think, is executed perfectly. The back, I think, perhaps could have maybe a more humble or more... I prefer for the movement to be finished in a more basic fashion, but done well, rather than trying to be more complex and done poorly. Now, I know it might sound like I'm being critical of this watch. We have to remind ourselves that this is a £500 watch. It's brilliant for £500. Put that into context, it's the same price as this Hamilton Khaki mechanical field watch. This Baltic is so much more complex than that Hamilton. And for £550, this really is very, very good looking. Nearly as good looking as our enamel mugs that we sell over at barkandjack.com. These are perfect for making your coffee whilst you're camping, or just for making your Instagram photographs look so much better. If you want to support the channel, jump over to barkandjack.com and check out our watch accessories and our enamel mugs, and drop me a comment down below and let me know what you think of this Baltic watch. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you like the style of this video, hit the subscribe button down there and that little bell icon so you get notifications when I drop a new video. If you're on Instagram, give me a follow at barkandjack, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care.